Hi, David. Can you hear me okay at home?
Yes, I can.
Great, thanks. Hello, everybody. Welcome to class. So today's writing prompt for roll will be to describe your own writing style. You know, when teachers or school or work aren't forcing you to write a certain way.
What if you don't write when you don't have to?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, a couple of students have answered with, well, I guess if you analyze my texts.
What if I tell you all the profanity that I use in my text messages?
Oh, well, then you could say that your style is profane. Yeah. You don't need to make a list of profanity. I'm fairly familiar with it.
Are you?
Yeah,
Are you sure?
I did read a book called The History of Swearing. It's a fantastic book. Yeah.
I think they have a TV version of that.
Yeah, Netflix recently did something, right? I haven't seen it yet. But the library has like a researched, well, and then like when I was a student, I took a linguistics class. That's like the scientific study of language. And we did, my group did a history of swearing. So, yeah.
So
I've studied it.
It's fine. Don't write it down. He knows. I get it.
That way, like every time I swear, I'm like, this is for learning. There's academic purpose here. Yeah, so Jesse's question does like reveal the flaws in my writing prompt, right? Like if I say describe your style when a teacher isn't forcing you to write, like that's the only time I ever write is when a teacher forces me to. Like, so I have no style whatsoever. But I also wonder, is your style something that can just be observed, when you naturally write something down, which occasionally we do, right? Like, I know that you're not all writing essays in your free time or writing stories in your free time or something like that. So is your style then, just the way that you use language in any setting? Or is the style then like only based on, no, I only ever write for work or school, therefore that's the only place you can observe my style? I don't know. It's a flawed question. Now, of course, I hope you develop a writing style and that you write in other situations outside of work and school. But it's kind of tricky, right? Because most of the time that's, school is the only thing that gives us a specific reason to write. All right, so let's observe 2 more writers today, and then that's the end of the writers you can choose from when looking for essay 2. So we'll start with Judy Brady on page 79 of the book. Then we'll go to Brett Lott. So I will read Brady's essay to you. Today's essays are short, so I can do that. I won't always read out loud to you. But this gives us a way to do some really close observations. I have 2 questions to start out the discussion with Brady. So I'll ask the questions and then you think about them as I read. What does she say? What does she mean? So it's kind of, it's tricky to separate it like that because that's not always necessary. With this essay, I believe it's necessary to separate what she says from what she means. So I will read to you and you can kind of think through how you might answer the question. I want a wife. I belong to that classification of people known as wives. I am a wife and, not altogether incidentally, I am a mother. Not too long ago, a male friend of mine appeared on the scene fresh from a recent divorce. He had 1 child who is, of course, with his ex-wife. He is obviously looking for another wife. As I thought about him while I was ironing one evening, it suddenly occurred to me that I, too, would like to have a wife. Why do I want a wife? I would like to go back to school so that I can become economically independent, support myself, and, if need be, support those dependent upon me. I want a wife who will work and send me to school. And while I am going to school, I want a wife to take care of my children. I want a wife to keep track of the children's doctor and dentist appointments, and to keep track of mine too. I want a wife to make sure my children eat properly and are kept clean. I want a wife who will wash the children's clothes and keep them mended. I want a wife who is a good, nurturing attendant to my children, who arranges for their schooling, makes sure that they have an adequate social life with their peers, takes them to the park, the zoo, etc. I want a wife who takes care of the children when they are sick, a wife who arranges to be around when the children need special care because, of course, I cannot miss classes at school. My wife must arrange to lose time at work and not lose the job. It may mean a small cut in my wife's income from time to time, but I guess I can tolerate that. Needless to say, my wife will arrange and pay for the care of the children while my wife is working. I want a wife who will take care of my physical needs. I want a wife who will keep my house clean, a wife who will pick up after me. I want a wife who will keep my clothes clean, ironed, mended, replaced when need be, and who will see to it that my personal things are kept in their proper place, that I can find what I need the minute I need it. I want a wife who cooks the meals, a wife who is a good cook. I want a wife who will plan the menus, do the necessary grocery shopping, prepare the meals, serve them pleasantly, and then do the cleaning while I do my studying. I want a wife who will care for me when I am sick and sympathize with my pain and loss of time from school. I want a wife to go along when our family takes a vacation so that someone can continue to care for me and my children when I need a rest and change of scene. I want a wife who will not bother me with rambling complaints about a wife's duties. I want a wife who will listen to me when I feel the need to explain a rather difficult point that I've come across in my course of studies. And I want a wife who will type my papers for me when I have written them. I want a wife who will take care of the details of my social life. When my wife and I are invited out by my friends, I want a wife who will take care of the babysitting arrangements. When I meet people at school that I like and want to entertain, I want a wife who will have the house clean, who will prepare a special meal, serve it to me and my friends, and not interrupt when I talk about the things that interest me and my friends. I want a wife who will have arranged that the children are fed and ready for bed before my guests arrive so that the children do not bother us. And I want a wife who knows that sometimes I need a night out for myself. I want a wife who is sensitive to my sexual needs, a wife who makes love passionately and eagerly when I feel like it, a wife who makes sure that I am satisfied, and of course, I want a wife who will not demand sexual attention when I'm not in the mood for it. I want a wife who assumes the complete responsibility for birth control because I do not want more children. I want a wife who will remain sexually faithful to me so that I do not have to clutter up my intellectual life with jealousies. And I want a wife who understands that my sexual needs may entail more than strict adherence to monogamy. I must, after all, be able to relate to people as fully as possible. If, by chance, I find another person more suitable as a wife than the wife I already have, I want the liberty to replace my present wife with another one. Naturally, I will expect a fresh, new life. My wife will take the children and be solely responsible for them so that I am left free. When I am through with school and have a job, I want my wife to quit working and remain at home so that my wife can fully and completely take care of her wife's duties. My God, who wouldn't want a wife? All right, so I've separated it. 2 questions. What does she say? What does she mean? Pick either question.
I see, like, what she was saying is, like, how men think, act, feel about women, I guess, or what they expect of them.
Yes, okay. I'm just trying to think how to phrase it. So I'll say this is how men think and expect women. All right, think about, yes. So although like she expresses one thing in the essay, what she really means is she's speaking from the point of view of a man, right? So this is how men think and expect of women. Yeah, good. Add to this, what else?
I think that just, I guess from speculating, this might have like a little bit of a personal meaning, like this might have happened in her, how the script is like everything.
So you expect that she's revealing a certain amount of her personal life? Okay. Without saying, this is what happened to me, she's somehow saying, this is what happened to me. Yeah. Good. So yeah, what I need to point out to students too, right? So did you notice when the essay was published? That's the date at the very, very end of the essay, 1971. When I was having students read this in like 2010, they're like, oh, this is about gay marriage. It's not, right? It's not, right? So, but like as times change, right, we think about it differently. So yeah, so the observation, like, well, maybe she's talking about her own experience. Yeah, good. More. What does she say? What does she? The easy. No one's taking the easy one here. What does she say? She's saying, I want a wife, right? And then we could say she elaborates on she's elaborating on the societal expectations for wives and women. Now, anything else? What does she really mean? She says she wants a wife, but she really means. What else? Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
She's needing to point out how the man was, how
Yeah, I'm just gonna say who or what is the it? When you say how, did you just say the time? So like the, the donut shop is like hitting all the wrong moments. So I'll say expectations. What do I keep doing here? The expectations are unfair, right? That's the gist of what you were saying. Yeah, good. Yeah, now she doesn't directly say that, but it is what she means, even if she doesn't say it directly. What else, Jesse?
I think she's encouraging people, men, if you will, to look at the demands of being a wife objectively. And from a point of humor.
Yeah, good. All right, so encouraging people, we'll throw out the question, men, maybe men specifically.
I think to people,
Okay,
men and now.
to examine the demands of being a wife, right? So she's saying, I want a wife to cook, to clean, to do this. But what she's really meaning is, hey, let's reevaluate this, right? Like there's some imbalance in the chores and duties here. Yeah, all right. Good. We'll come back to the question of audience in a minute, because you're absolutely right. Like if we say, is this written to women? How does that affect how we read it? Is this written to men? How does that affect how we read it? Is this written to everybody? Yeah. Well, maybe we should just ask that
I think
then.
there's also a certain sense of irony in there too.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, she states at the beginning, she is a woman,
Uh-huh.
she is a wife, she's a mother.
Yep. She's in the role, right? Okay, so irony. So like if we say, what do you call it when you say one thing but you mean something else? Irony is the answer. So she says, I want a wife, but she doesn't really mean that she wants to marry a woman. She means,
She wants, like, the idea of it.
yeah, it's like, I want somebody to do some of this work. And I don't want it to always be me, right? So part of what she's saying is, right, like things need to change. Household duties need to be shared. That might be what she's saying, right? She might be saying, I need a wife to do all the work with the children. She might really be saying, like, you know what? Men should do some of this. Even though she's not using that directly, right? But we figure it out, right? We pick it up because of irony, right? You say one thing, you mean something else. We're familiar with irony, right? It comes in many forms. One of those forms is sarcasm. Sarcasm is irony that's meant to be critical or harsh. And she's sometimes sarcastic in here. So when we're talking to somebody face to face, how do we know when they're being ironic or sarcastic?
Facial expression and tone.
We read their face, we hear their tone. So I say, hey, how was English class today? Oh, it was really interesting, right? Maybe they roll their eyes, we hear the change in their voice, and we're like, okay, it wasn't interesting, something else happened, right? Yeah, good. Okay, irony, how do we figure it out in writing? What do you think?
Sometimes the kids just be, in this case, it's so sorry to be on, and don't realize that it couldn't be actually being said. And we're okay.
Good. Yes. So you said you said we recognize that there's some sort of break in the meaning. We're like, I don't think she's meaning what she says. Readers have to recognize. I'm gonna say like a disjuncture, a disconnect. Yeah, good. How did you recognize? Oh yeah, go ahead, add some more.
She italicized stuff.
Yeah, good. So that becomes part of how we recognize, right? The italics And that's part of her style, right? But it is how, so I could have read it differently, right? Like when we get to, I want a wife to take care of my physical needs, right? Like I could have, like if I, right, it creates some sort of emphasis and we know, okay, I'm supposed to read that differently. Good, yeah. Other ways that we recognize irony in writing. We've all made the mistake of sending a sarcastic text message, right? And you send it to the right person, you send it to your friend, you send it to your family member who just knows you really well, and they're like, yeah, that's my friend, always sarcastic, right? But you send a sarcastic text message to the wrong person, what happens? Yeah, they're like, oh no, Jesse's really mad. Like, no, I was kidding. Like, no, you sounded angry. I'm like, I didn't sound anything. It was a text, right? Yeah, or I have one of my brothers who never takes anything I say seriously, and the other one who takes everything seriously, and I need him like somewhere in the middle, right? Like, I'm like, oh crap, I sent that to the wrong brother. There, he's not gonna know I was joking. And so we cheat a little with text messages. How do we let people know we're being sarcastic in a text? Emojis do the job, right? And I think they came in to like adapt. And yeah, so they're like, oh wait, what do I need to do? Yeah, good. Any other ways that you recognize, like at what point when you were reading, did you go, she's being ironic, or she doesn't mean this exactly the way that she said it?
When you started reading, I wish I had a wife.
Oh, right from the beginning? Okay.
Well, I mean, at the beginning of, I thought that was gonna be it, but the more I read, it was like continuous and,
Okay.
okay, this is way different than I thought.
So repetition of the phrase, I want, right? That might be, or maybe it's the repetition of the a wife who, and, right? So that might, so it was the constant repetition that led you to know, all right, I have to read this a certain way. All right, good. Thomas, what else?
I always got that I belong to the classification of people known as wives.
Okay. Yeah, that's an unusual opening, right?
Usually, if you are my mom, I belong to the classification of people known as wives.
Yeah, that's like creating like this, introducing us to it as if we've never heard of it before. We're like, well, I'm familiar with the word, but she's playing with this a little there. So that was one of your signs that it was ironic or sarcastic. Okay, good. Other ways that when did you as a reader start to catch on, or when did her message really start to come through to you?
I don't think it took long. Like, it was pretty odd.
Well, it's a short essay.
It is, but like the third paragraph.
Yeah.
She's repetition.
All right, I'm going to bold it so that we don't forget it. Yes. And I think if you're going to be that repetitive, it better be short because readers are going to, because it eventually becomes clear and you don't want to be hit over the head for too long. Yeah. All right, so let's go back to the question of audience as we develop our sense of like what she's doing here. So what was your initial impression? Did you think she's writing to men, or did you think she's writing to women, or did you think something else? And then let's start to evaluate where this was originally published.
I just saw it as both.
Okay, why both, or why, or what were your ideas in that regard?
Because at the time it was kind of set up like this, when we were supposed to pretty much do everything. And you just tell them not much is going to change. So I mean, see it as the norm. So I knew that she was talking about to get women to change their mind and change the whole stigma.
Good, all right, I'm trying to capture some of what you're saying here. So you immediately noticed that date then, it sounds like, and you thought, well, what did society expect of women in 1971? what would happen if men read this? What would happen if women read this? And you're saying, well, everybody has to change their mind if society's going to change. So that's what gives you the big picture. All right, good. Thank you. Other details? What else, Melissa?
I think it's largely written to women because myself being a wife, I have thought those same things in the past.
Okay.
And it's something that women, especially then, would have just been able to associate with.
All right. So you see women as a specific target audience because there's a lot of kind of insider point of view there that they will recognize and share. All right. Good. Good. Other ideas, other reactions you've had, or other analysis?
I think all of the above.
All of the above.
I think it's, kind of in that era, 60s, 70s, we've got human rights on a lot of different levels.
Uh-huh.
And, worldly perspective about what's right and what's wrong and the kinds of things. It may have started from a woman's point of view, but I think it hit all the notes.
Okay. You're right to recognize the context, the social context, right? Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X are writing in the late 60s. The United States passes some federal reform for the Civil Rights Act in the late 60s. And after America starts to recognize we need to make sure that people of all races have equal rights, then you hear these voices saying, and, right? And don't forget women. Yeah, good. And so this is considered second wave feminism. First wave would have been in the early 1900s when women earned the right to vote, right? When they were able to successfully get the government to change, right, and give women the legal right to vote. So originally published in Ms. Magazine. Ms. Magazine, still in publication. The library subscribes to it. You can go find it on the shelves. It is feminist magazine, right? So it's a magazine that was specifically written, hey, let's give a voice to women who want to see things change. And this was in the first ever issue of the magazine. Here's kind of a tricky thing, right? When you publish a magazine for the first time ever, who are your readers? Like you can have a target like, hey, let's grab the attention of women who want to see things change, and we'll write a magazine, but like the first time it's ever coming out, right? You're like, okay, well, how do we get people to buy a brand new magazine? So they gave it away. They stuck it inside New York Magazine. So New York Magazine gives us the idea like, okay, metropolitan, right? Big city magazine. So maybe there's part of the audience there, right? New York Magazine is a national magazine. It goes all over the place, right? It's not just published in New York, but the title gives you some indication of its origin, right? And then Ms., right, like historically, we're looking at a title for women, right? Because the options used to be, you are Mrs., you are Miss, and they said, oh yeah, what about this one? So Mrs. means married, Miss means not married, Ms. means none of your business. That's what it's like. Is there a generic way to do this? What's Mr. mean? Right? So Ms. is specifically like trying to erase some of those distinctions and labels, right? That women can be united as a group, not separated into these distinctions based on marriage. And so Ms. is targeting that idea, right? That women can be united in that way. So, but it was their first issue, right? So it's a tricky thing, right? You can have the target who you want to reach, but of course, if people don't know your magazine exists yet, they can't necessarily jump on board. And so that's one of the challenges it will go through. It's interesting, right? So they did have a target audience, and the intro will tell you they were hoping to grab middle-class women who read other national magazines like Good Housekeeping and Cosmopolitan. but then of course, like the observations that, well, if you want society to change, and so we have to roll down here, what does she mean? Things need to change. We did list that as one of the things, right? Who has to do the changing? Well, everybody, right? So yeah, 1971, who do you think, who's reading in 1971? Generationally, who are we looking at? I'll make this confession. My parents weren't yet married in 1971. So not quite them yet, I don't think. So I'm like, oh, is it my grandparents? How about for you, generationally? We're looking parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, 1971, where are we? Grandparents, yeah. And I've had students who say, I'm leaving this essay on my grandpa's coffee table. I want him to read it. 1971, we're in 2021. When you read this essay, did you think, wow, times have changed? Or did you read this and say, wow, things haven't changed? What was your own reaction as a reader? Like looking at the date. Thomas?
Kind of take the possibility of still process of editing some of our habits.
Okay, good. Other reactions? Miguel, what else?
When I saw the data, wow, I mean, I was born in '96, I mean, even that day is not too long ago. And it's like still prevalent today.
Yeah.
Like there's a change, but it's still lingering.
Okay, good. Good, yeah, perspective is one of those things that we develop, right? That we're, we think something happened a long time ago, and we can also go like, wait, that wasn't so long ago. Okay, good. Yeah, other reactions? What else did you?
I think that things have changed, definitely. I was actually having a conversation with my dad the other day. He was saying that one of his coworkers had mentioned that he has never changed the diaper. And everyone.
So my own perspective on that is like, what?
And everyone else was saying, wow, what's wrong with you? When 20 years ago, it would have been, wow, what an accomplishment.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, so I had a couple of years where I stayed at home with my kids while my wife worked, and the oddest conversations were with the grandpas who were like, why? Because they were the generation of like, I never changed a diaper because I wasn't supposed to. Whereas, yeah, nowadays we'll see like we've seen things shift, right? Like where there's specific roles that society says men do this, women do this. And I think nowadays we see a lot more negotiation where we say in our household, one person does this, another person does this, or depending on the schedule or the day of the week, right? It depends on who's going to be doing what chores in the house or what tasks with the kid. So yeah, we see sometimes it's generational, sometimes it's specific families, right? Yeah, were you raising your hand too on something?
Yeah, I mean, yes, generational, yes, a lot of big changes as far as like women's rights and human rights overall, but it's always going to be a problem. It's just who's holding the ball at that point in time.
Okay. Yeah, because if you dig deep, right, study like the history of these issues, you can see that it hasn't always been this way. We might call the essay that we're like this is the scenario she's describing as traditional, but of course it wasn't always that way in the history of humankind, right? It's been that way for certain decades in American history, but we can look at other countries, we can look at other time periods, other centuries, and see like, oh, people used to do things differently then, right? Yeah. So it comes and goes. It does change. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Other observations, other reactions? All right. Let's talk a little bit more about her style. There's a few things that she's doing that we haven't pointed out yet that are not as directly related to the topic, but they're kind of unusual in their writing style. So we've had one of them pointed out with the italics. If you notice how she begins and ends the essay, she uses rhetorical questions. Right? When you ask the audience a question, they're not there to answer, so you're really just trying to get a point across. Asking questions is one type of style. Let me point out something odd here, page 80, second paragraph. I want a wife who'll take care of my physical needs. I want a wife who'll keep my house clean. A wife who will pick up after me. That is not a sentence, that's a fragment. Right, the definition of a sentence fragment is it's missing a subject or a verb or both. Now that one, we understand what's going on there, right? Because she's repeated, I want, I want, I want. So when she says, a wife who will pick up after me, we know that she means I want, but it's not in the sentence, right? So from one period to the next, it's missing the subject and the verb. So sentence fragments, and that's not the only one. What else?
There's also the one on the end of 79 that ends on the next page, or instead of a comma, just use that and to keep track of mine.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. So what's going on? How come she can do this? How come she's using a sentence fragment? If we were told by our English teachers, don't write sentence fragments, what's going on here? Does she not know the rules? Because she's already published. It doesn't matter, right? Good question. Yeah, it's because she can, but there's more than that too, right? So what we want to do is say, well, what's the effect? What's the effect on readers when she puts in a sentence fragment or multiple sentence fragments? Let me point out one other grammatical issue she's got. Did you notice that she begins sentences with and but? Did you ever have a teacher tell you not to do that? There's 2 rules that she's breaking, or maybe 3, if we separate them out into 3 separate rules.
Is it like forcing the reader to assume what she was gonna say? So like, you just automatically would say, I want a wife, so you're just like automatically together.
I think that's part of it, yes. Like especially with the sentence fragments, right? She repeats the phrase, I want a wife, so many times that we'll fill in the blank. So when she doesn't put it there, we do. And so then I think it helps us kind of, we move the essay with our brains, we move it forward because we're like, oh, you want a wife who, oh, you didn't say that, but oh, yeah, I got it, message received, right? She's repeated it so many times, it's just in our head already. Yeah. Any other ideas? Why break these rules? What's the effect on the reader? So let me ask you, why does your teacher tell you don't start sentences with and but? I don't know, they just told me not to do it. So and but are conjunctions, right? Conjunctions are words that join things together. When you start a sentence with a conjunction, you're saying this idea is incomplete. It needs the idea that comes before it. So your teachers generally say, don't start with a conjunction. Instead, get rid of the period and join those together. Or if it's an independent idea, get rid of the word and, right? So if she is saying and, we start to notice like, oh, that's a long list that doesn't end. That's the other reason why your teachers tell you to do it. It can be an exhausting way to write. We get exhausted. We're like, whoa, just keep adding stuff on. And she's like, yep, right? And that's part of the effect is that we get emotionally exhausted alongside her. Imagine like a little kid giving you a Christmas wish list. What do you want for Christmas? I want a Nintendo and this toy and that toy and that toy and that toy and it can go on and on. It's repetitive, it's monotonous, it's heavy, and that's part of her message. It's like, yeah, this is repetitive and monotonous, and I could go on and. So it's stylistic, it's deliberate, and it needs a limit. But yeah, like our brain starts to automatically fill in the gaps. And I think that helps emphasize her point. So anytime somebody breaks the rules, it's gonna draw attention to itself. And so one of the answers is almost always emphasis, right? Like, why would the writer draw our attention to this idea, to this line, to this concept? And it's, that's part of the goal, right? Well, I'm looking at it. Any other observations about, we've said repetition, right? Yep, that was one of the key ones.
We folded it. Come on.
I know. It's because of the screen. I miss having a huge whiteboard that I can just like write across the whole thing. All right. Let's put this one on pause. Let's go to the other essay. All right, so Brett Lott's essay, Atonement, was published in the year 2000. This puts us on page 275. Now, it's not a perfect matchup with this essay, but I think that they're fun to lay side by side for a couple of different reasons. And one of those first reasons that should be fairly clear is that he's describing the life of a father. So I'm going to read this one out loud to you, and then we'll play with the question of, well, what does it mean to be a father, looking at his essay specifically. Page 275, Atonement. Then there are days like today. We were trying to get out of the house for karate camp this morning. Karate camp being a program for kids from 8 o'clock to noon for a week at the studio where Zeb has his lessons. Melanie was already gone to work, and the boys were out in the garage, and the boys out in the garage were ready to go. Except for the Reefs, those Velcro sandals I told Zeb to put on before we ever got outside. But Dad, he said, we're barefoot in the studio. We don't have to wear them. Then, for all the various and minuscule transgressions that had been already visited upon me this day, when I let the dog out this morning to relieve herself, she made a beeline to the house under construction next door and the discarded chicken bones the framers leave there each day. Zeb and Jake argued before a single light had been turned on about who got to use the bathroom first when they woke up. I had to tell Jacob 4 times to comb his hair. I had to tell Zeb 3 times to clear the breakfast dishes. The sink was full of pots and pans from the dinner party last night. Melanie was already gone. For all these terrible facts of the day thus far, I blew up at Zeb. I yelled, I shouted, I threw my hands up in the air, ranted about obeying your father, ranted about the fire ants out there on the grass where we park our little VW bug, those ants just waiting for bare feet and the opportunity to bite, ranted about never listening to me, ranted about and about and about. I yelled the first 10 minutes of the 15-minute drive to the studio. My stomach churned up now about how little writing I'd gotten done the day before, in preparing for the above-mentioned dinner party, about the deadline for a book I'd missed by a month already, about the 22-page story I was about to trash because it died suddenly the day before yesterday. All of these concerns were translated into a language that involved only words about Velcro sandals, about fire ants, about the idea of obeying your father. My world and its woes boiled down to, why don't you just listen and obey me without making me yell? The last 5 minutes of the drive, we passed in silence, me feeling the stupidity of it all, of my yelling about things that finally had very little to do with these 2 boys. Zeb, next to me, only looked out his window, as did Jacob behind us, the 2 of them wondering, I imagine, if they dared speak. But when we parked in front of the studio, Zeb already with his door open, ready to climb out, I reached to him, put my arm around his neck, pulled him to me. I hugged him and said, I'm sorry, I know, I shouldn't have done that. That's okay, he said over my shoulder. Can we go to Wendy's for lunch? Jacob said from the back seat, sensing the window of opportunity, his father contrite. Zeb pulled away, smiling, and I turned, looked at Jacob. He was leaning forward, grinning. Sure, I said. Wendy's, I said. Then I looked at Zeb, standing now and pulling forward the seat back to let his brother out. Zeb, I said, and he looked at me. You have to wear the reef so you don't get ant bites, okay? Okay, he said and smiled again. By this time, Jacob was out. He slammed shut the door, and they turned, ran along the sidewalk to the glass door of the place, disappeared, just like that. There are days like today, days with no story really other than the misstep, the idiot words and gestures, the sincere belief, for a moment, however blind, that all this yelling might actually do some good, when the world and Velcro sandals seem somehow malevolently aligned against you. Then the right word, the right gesture, the lunch at Wendy's, atonement after confession. No story really, other than it being a father. All right, so he kind of paints this picture for us. What is the role of a father? According to Brett Lott, what do we see? What does a dad do?
Stressors of life.
Well, I'm gonna say handles or mishandles.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good, yeah. More.
Yells, blows up,
What do dads do? They yell.
feel bad,
Yeah, and we also see some guilt, right?
guilt, shame, a little bit of reward in there after that happens.
Yeah. All right, how about household stuff? What do we see dad doing?
We take care.
Oh, yeah. Some childcare, right? Yeah, like if Judy Brady's reading this essay, she might be like, hey, look at you taking care of your kids, right? Household chores. Yep. He's got to do the dishes.
I guess making sure kids are safe, so they don't
Yeah.
get hit by ants.
Safety, and then I was just thinking too, like they're like brushing their hair, getting them dressed, right? Yeah, what else, William?
Curious, was there a real reason for being super descriptive about what sounds were?
I think that's a fair observation.
Well, you kind of have to write it, so you might as well.
I have an idea, but first of all, like, what do you think? Like, what he does? He like pauses to explain in the middle of all this other stuff. Like, why is he pausing to explain Velcro sandals?
Like ants not eating leaves or something.
Yeah.
It's the simplest possible shoe for a kid to put on that they didn't want to put on.
I think that's part of it, right? It's like, can you put on your, like, today we'd probably just say, put on your flip-flops, right? Like, we wouldn't care if they had what kind of strap they had, we just say flip-flops. So I think he's over-explaining, I think you're right. But I think there's that idea, there's just like, I'm not asking you to go lace up a pair of knee-high boots. I'm asking you to slip into your sandals and get in the car. So he thinks his expectation was low. The kid was like, oh, why do I have to do that? And I think that's why he's frustrated. But I think you're right. He's over explaining it because he's recognizing, like, I'm putting way too much into this. It's a small thing and I'm thinking too hard about it. And that's the flaw, right? That's like, as a dad, he's like, I'm making a big deal out of this. Oh, this stupid thing that I don't need to make a big deal out of. So maybe that's part of it too. It's like he's trying to help us recognize, like, man, kids are lazy. Oh, and dads freak out about dumb things.
VW deal just said the car in the driveway, put the ants around it, but instead, VW.
That's what dads do. They talk about that Volkswagen bug in the driveway.
Okay, I'm gonna put this. This is good. So I'm gonna say part of his style is attention to detail, right?
Attention to dad.
There's a difference between mom details and dad.
I'm listening.
There is.
Right, yeah, like what he's gonna pause to explain versus what he's just gonna let go. Like, Reeves, you've heard of them, right? With the Velcro straps. No, hold on, let me explain this, right? That's a mansplaining what flip-flops are.
He was probably mad about the extra $6 he had to spend on the
And Velcro is capitalized because that's a company name. So it's part of his style, right, is to give us these details. And maybe it's a question of gender identity. Men give attention to some kinds of details, women give attention to other kinds of details. I think it's also kind of revealing, like, his flaw, right? Like part of what he's recognizing as a dad is that he spent 10 minutes yelling at his kids about Velcro sandals and ants. But what was he really upset about?
It wasn't.
It was household stuff, right? He was stressed out because of work. He was stressed out because of a messy house. He was stressed out because of the dog. He felt like they were going to be late. He blew up at the kids, but the problem was internal. It was him. So I think that might be part of it, right? He's showing us that he was focused on the wrong things.
Reflecting all the stress on the other things created by this.
Yeah. And so, but here's the trick, and I think this is also part of his style, right? He's telling a story. This is a narrative. Narratives are kind of indirect in their message, right? He has to imply rather than just directly tell us a lot of things. And that's part of what's going on here, is that we're like, why is he spending so much time on that? And we have to sit and think it through because he's not going to tell us everything. Yeah. So yeah, I think those are great observations.
Do you ever think that he uses that detail to actually like connect with his audience?
So my own perspective as a dad reading the essay, I would say absolutely. Because there's like things that I read in this essay that I'm like, oh, geez, I've done that. Like I've yelled about Velcro sandals. And so, which is like misdirection, right? Like I'm focused on one thing. And here's the other thing is that like in conversations with my kids who are now getting older, they're like, man, Dad sure likes Velcro sandals. I'm like, that's not what I was mad about. I was mad about this other thing. But we fixate on the one detail. So yeah, I think it's a connection thing, right? If you give really precise details, it'll conjure up certain images or ideas. Like we see that VW bug. And like the big picture, it does not matter that it was a VW bug. But it gives us a really, really specific image to focus on, right? Like, yeah, it could have just been the car. And we would all understand the car. But yeah, it's part of his style. It is one way that writers connect. So I was going to ask, does this guy work? He does, right? But he's also, and his wife works. So we have two working parents. And so that's right. This is other detail. And that creates a real generation gap with the Judy Brady essay. I just want to point out, you got what his job was, right? Yeah, he's a writer. The thing we're like, yeah, well, of course I know, I'm reading his essay. I want to point out, he wrote 22 pages of a story and realized it wouldn't work and had to throw it out, right? So if you ever feel discouraged about a rough draft that, like, oh, I wrote 2 pages and had to throw it out, just remember poor Brett Lott with 22 pages and having to throw it out. All right, so he's telling us the role of a father, but he's being indirect, right? And that's part of his style, is to tell us the story and we go, wow, sure looks hectic. Someone in the last class said, sounds like a circus. I was like, yep. But he doesn't have to tell us that. We figure it out by implication. What else did you notice about his style? Anything about the way that he writes?
Very descriptive.
Very descriptive, yeah. I'm going to put that up here with the dad details.
Not only did you count how many times you at Jacob and that, and where the chicken bones came from.
Yeah, it's just not that the dog was getting into garbage. The dogs were getting into chicken bones that the framers had left at the house next door. Yeah.
He uses semicolons a lot.
Yes.
That's probably how he feels in that situation. This kid won't behave. This has got his shoes off. Like it just goes on and on and on.
Yeah. Now.
Kid stuff just kind of follows that.
Yes, good. So he's got like some really long sentences, and those are hooked together with those semicolons. But like notice too, so like page 276, that paragraph near the top of the page. I yelled, I shouted. That's 2 very short sentences. Now the next one is all the semicolons. I threw my hands up in the air, comma, ranted about obeying your father, semicolon, ranted about the fire ants out there in the grassward park, the VW bug, comma, right? You're getting out of breath. And of course, what does somebody do when they're yelling? They get out of breath, right? So he's using style, his sentence structure to also kind of capture that message. ranted about and about and about. We see repetition playing a role there. Repetition of specific words. Did you notice that this guy also uses italics?
Yes.
Did you notice that this guy also had sentence fragments?
It's all through that one.
Yes.
He uses a lot of quotations too.
Yeah, dialogue, conversation, right? Let me point out a couple of his sentence fragments. Bottom of the page, 276. He says, okay, he said, smiled again, but this time Jacob was out. He slammed shut the door, they turned, ran along the sidewalk to the glass door of the place, disappeared, just like that. Sentence fragment. His final paragraph, there are days like today, days with no story really other than the misstep, idiot words. That's not a sentence. That one has no verb. It's attached to the previous one. There are days like today. There are days with no story. But he just has days with no story really other than. And then he says, then the right word, the right gesture, period. That's a fragment. The lunch at Wendy's, atonement after confession, fragment. No story really other than of being a father, fragment. Lots of sentence fragments. I don't think he starts his sentences with and. We see one with but. So here's kind of the weird thing. I'm like, hey, look, those are all on our thing with Judy Brady, right? Repetition, italics, and sentence fragments. But he's doing something totally different. What's your observation, Thomas?
He also used some pretty lengthy run-on sentences, like on 276, third paragraph technically, was like a pretty decent chunk, but half of that's one sentence.
Is it the IEL? Yeah, good. Yeah, so run-on sentence. So again, we see somebody breaking the rules. Yeah, now he's using sentence fragments, he's using italics, he's using repetition. Does that make his essay similar to Brady? What do you think? Are they doing the same thing but to totally different end? What do you think? Go ahead, Tom.
Easier in style, but different message.
Okay, yeah, good. Good. This is one of those that I was like, wow, these, I don't think these essays could be more different. They're very different, but there's some stuff they're like, oh no, look at that. They're doing some of the same thing. Any other observations? What's his title mean? Atonement.
Forgiveness.
Yeah, good. So his message, right, his big idea is about forgiveness, and atonement is related to that thematically, right? Atonement is usually like a big religious principle of forgiveness, like think of like a sacrifice of Jesus Christ, big, and he shrinks it down to something tiny, right? So for him, forgiveness is confessing that he yelled, and then reconciliation might be the other word we use with atonement, where the one kid said, "We take us to Wendy's." Okay, right? And he knows he has to because he has to make things right. And so he takes this big idea, this concept of atonement, and shrinks it down to this small, how do you make things right? Well, you apologize and buy some French fries, I guess, right? Yeah. All right, so now I'm gonna kind of bring the essays together, but I have like a specific observation about writing style. Now, one of the pieces of advice I often give students is I want them to recognize the difference between showing and telling. Oop. Show. Tell. What's the difference? Show versus tell. So let's before we look at the essays, just what's the general difference between show and tell?
The directness
Yes, which one's which?
shows kind of indirect.
Oh, gotta spell these things right. All right. Yes, all right. Any other major differences that you guys would like to point out? Show versus tell.
Visual versus auditory.
The same order here, so visual. I'm gonna say oral. I mean, it's heard, right? We could also say verbal. Good. Now, I think that one of these essays is primarily show and one of them is primarily tell. I think there's elements of both in both essays. Well, what's your own observation? Is one of these essays more show and the other one more tell? What do you think?
I think it probably is more tell. You know, there's more show because she wasn't directly saying you had to kind of figure it out. Almost as kind of word. There was also a bit of tell.
Yeah, the irony in hers makes it indirect, but yeah, it's tell because.
Because you can pretty much see it even though it was a show. It's kind of obvious.
Okay.
It's almost like she was telling you, but not at the same time.
Yeah, it's a messier question than I want it to be. So he says generally, he sees atonement as tell and wife as show. Agree, disagree? What do you think, the rest of you? What did you think, Brody?
I think that the atonement will show what personal is of showing personal experience, like directly.
Uh-huh.
Telling just telling about a problem.
Okay. Yeah, so that's how I initially saw it, was like, he shows us an example of what it's like to be a father. She tells us directly what a wife does. So that's how I visualize it. I recognize that like the way that we use the words, we can cross over quite a bit. Other observations, other answers? What are the strengths and weaknesses to show? What are the strengths and weaknesses of tell?
If you show somebody you have to rely on them being able to understand you,
Uh-huh.
if you tell them, you can tell them what you're thinking.
Yeah, good.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, so how much responsibility do we put on the reader, right? And for them to figure it out versus us just telling them what they need to do. Were you raising your hand too? Oh, okay. Good. Other strengths, weaknesses, show, tell. Melissa, what do you think?
So you pretty much have to trust that the reader knows what you're talking about, what it looks like. Like when he's saying the ants around the beetle, unless you understand what that would actually look like with the ant piles around all of it, you're okay, there's ants.
Why are there ants? Yeah. Good. Yeah. Good. And yeah, what else?
I think it just goes back to the basics in the beginning, reader message.
Yes.
Who are you talking to? How important it is to get this point across. You can play with both, certainly.
Yeah.
But one has an advantage that the other doesn't.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
it depends on the situation.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, I think they're tools that writers have, right? And it's up to us as writers to figure out, well, when should I show them? Like, here's this day I had with the kids. And the readers are like, wow, that sounds stressful. And we're like, good job. You're a very perceptive reader. I don't even say like, hey, being a wife sucks. Look at all these terrible things that I have to do. We're like, got it. Message received, right? Depending on the situation, we have to decide when is it best to show, when is it best to tell. Yeah, and there's not like it's always one or always the other. I think that's where we have to be careful. And so like very often, like in an essay, as I'm reading something, I'll say, you told me what your main idea is. Can you show me an example, right? And so I'll be like, here's the right place to tell me, but now I need some evidence. I need some support. And then sometimes I'll say, all right, can you just tell me how to understand this, right? So I'll say, you presented an example here, but it needs some direct explanation. And yeah, there's strengths and weaknesses to each. So I think you're right, that message and purpose, right? Who is my reader and how am I best going to communicate my message to them? I also think of like a lawyer in front of a judge and a jury, right? You're trying to get the judge and the jury to see things a certain way. You could pull out a piece of evidence and just lay it on the table, but sometimes evidence needs interpretation. Like, why does it look that way? Why, you know, so like if you can just hold up a photo and say, you see in this photo, things are happening this way, but it's not always going to be obvious. So there's a mix is really necessary, but I think that we can see Lott, I think, is relying on show more and Brady's relying on tell more. And I think both are really strong essays, but I think that they're doing it to different ends, different goals. I've seen students successfully steal elements from both of these essays as they write their own. I've seen students who take the Judy Brady style with irony, and they say, all right, I want to write an essay. I had somebody who was working at McDonald's, and she wrote an essay called, I Want a Minimum Wage Worker, and then like listed all the things expected of her job, put in some sentence fragments, did a lot of repetition, made it sound like the voice of a demanding boss, and really revealed, you know, something like the really difficult working circumstances this person was in. And I thought that was really well done. There was some good irony in there. I had a student who once wanted to demonstrate the life of a student and just describe, using Brett Lott's style, his day at work, how when his work shift ended, but the next person wasn't there, he had to stick around, was late to get to school, kind of got in trouble at school, ended up not finding a parking spot, making it to class late. After class, went to go put his money in the vending machine to get some lunch. The vending machine ate his money, nowhere to sit, had to go sit on the floor and study for a test. And it was one of those at the end of the essay, like, wow, that sounds tough, right? And of course, that was the goal. So I've seen students borrow, but here's the big deal. You have all your options, right? Essay 2 is coming up. So next week, let me get the syllabus schedule up here. So we're on week 7. Week 8 on March 2nd, Tuesday, March 2nd, we will meet on Zoom. It'll be a workshop. It'll be similar to our previous workshop in that wherever you are, whether you're home or somewhere on campus, you need a draft of your paper. And in that draft, you want to, so maybe you've just started the essay and you haven't written the introduction yet. Maybe you've written the introduction, but you haven't quite gotten into the essay, or maybe you have like a short version of both. Whatever you have, we're sharing it. We're asking questions. We're trying to solve problems as we get ready to hand in the final draft the next week. And then on Thursday, March 4th, we will meet in class, and it'll be a workshop on grammar and punctuation. So what I've done is I've tried to observe the most frequent errors with commas and periods, and we'll talk about how to fix those. Of course, what you can always do now is say like, oh, I was just imitating Judy Brady. I put in sentence fragments on purpose, right? That's one possible excuse. Do you have questions or concerns? So I will not see you in person on Tuesday. I will see you on Zoom. Keep reading, keep writing.
You said
Yeah, bring it to the Zoom workshop. Yeah. Thanks for your participation.